The wind moves differently here. It doesn't rush through Virginia City the way it once did, when 20,000 souls crowded these slopes, when the stamp mills thundered day and night, when silver flowed like a river beneath men's feet. Now the wind moves through empty window frames. It rattles the corrugated iron still clinging to false front buildings. It whispers through the skeletal remains of mine head frames that once lowered men into darkness, and sometimes never brought them back up. Stand on C Street today and you can see it all at once. The careful preservation and the slow decay. Tourist shops selling ghost town merchandise occupy buildings where millionaires once gambled away fortunes in a single night. The old Territorial Enterprise building still stands. Mark Twain worked there, cutting his teeth on frontier journalism before the world knew his name. But walk 2 blocks south, past where the tour buses idle, and you'll find structures leaning into the mountain itself, held up by nothing but momentum and memory. This was once the richest place in America, not just rich, the richest. Between 1859 and 1880, the Comstock Lode beneath this mountain produced over $300 million in silver and gold. In today's money, that's more than $8 billion, pulled from the earth by hand, dynamite, and desperate human labor. The wealth extracted from this single Nevada mountain helped finance the Union during the Civil War, built San Francisco into a metropolis, and created some of the largest fortunes in American history. But Virginia City isn't San Francisco. It's a ghost town clinging to a mountainside at 6,200 feet, where winter temperatures drop below zero and summer sun bakes the desert sage until it smells like medicine and dust. The people who built the city are gone. The silver is gone. What remains is harder to categorize. Part museum, part tourist trap, part authentic ruin, part performance of the Old West for visitors who arrive in air-conditioned cars and leave before sunset. How does a place fall from the absolute pinnacle of American wealth to near total abandonment in less than 2 decades? How do you lose an entire city? And what does it mean that we've turned that loss into entertainment? That we've made the corpse of American capitalism into a gift shop? If you enjoy deep investigations into America's forgotten cities, ghost towns, and lost empires, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which place to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. The story begins with a question nobody asked. What happens when you find silver so pure, so abundant, that it rewrites every rule of geology you thought you understood? January 1859. The Sierra Nevada in winter. The California gold rush, 10 years old now, is dying. The easy gold is gone. Thousands of prospectors who came west with dreams of wealth are scattered across the western territories, chasing rumors, digging test holes, panning streams that yield less and less each season. Many have gone home. Many more have died from disease, accident, violence, or simple exhaustion. The ones who remain are the desperate, the addicted, the believers in one more strike. On the eastern slope of the Sierras, in what will become Nevada, still part of Utah Territory in 1859, a group of prospectors is working a placer claim in Gold Canyon. They're finding gold, but not much. Flour gold, they call it. Dust, barely worth the labor. But they keep digging because that's what prospectors do. They follow the trace upstream into the mountain, looking for the source. 2 Irish immigrants, Peter O'Reilly and Patrick McLaughlin, are working a claim on the side of Mount Davidson when they hit something strange. Gold, yes, but mixed with something else. A heavy blue-black mud that clogs their rockers and makes separation difficult. They curse it. It's ruining their gold recovery. They consider abandoning the claim. A man named Henry Comstock, loud, boastful, not particularly skilled, shows up and claims the ground is partially his. He has no legal right to it, but he's persuasive or at least persistent. They let him in on the claim to avoid a fight. His name will end up on the lode, which is how history works sometimes. The loud man gets remembered. They send samples of the blue mud to an assayer in Grass Valley, California. When the results come back, everything changes. The mud isn't waste. It's silver sulfide, extraordinarily rich silver sulfide. The sample assays at over $3,000 per ton, 75% of it pure silver. Nobody has ever seen anything like it. Not in Nevada, not in California, Not anywhere in North America. Word spreads the way fire spreads in dry grass. Within weeks, thousands of men are scrambling up the mountain. Within months, a tent city sprawls across the slopes. They call it Virginia City, supposedly after a drunk prospector from Virginia who claimed the ground. More likely, nobody remembers exactly why, and the story gets cleaned up later. That's how origin stories work in America. They get told and retold until the truth and the myth become the same thing. But here's what matters. Beneath this mountain, there is wealth beyond comprehension. The Comstock Lode runs deep, hundreds of feet, eventually thousands of feet into the earth. It's not a vein. It's a geological anomaly. A massive lens of silver-bearing ore formed by volcanic activity millions of years before humans existed. And now, in 1859, at the exact moment when America is about to tear itself apart in civil war, someone has found it. The men who will control this wealth are already moving into position. They're not the prospectors. They're never the prospectors. They're the lawyers, the speculators, the merchants, the men with access to capital. Men like William Sharon, who will become the king of the Comstock. Men like John Mackay, George Hearst, James Fair, James Flood, the names that will define Western mining for a generation. They see what the prospectors can't. That individual claims mean nothing. That the real wealth will come from consolidation, from corporate control, from vertical integration. They begin buying up claims. They form companies. They bring in engineers from Cornwall and Germany. Men who understand deep shaft mining. Men who know how to extract ore from 1,000 feet underground. And they need labor. Thousands upon thousands of men willing to descend into the earth for $3 a day. The mountain is about to be torn open. And a city, a real city, with banks and opera houses and newspapers and mansions, is about to rise in one of the most inhospitable places in North America, sustained entirely by the silver beneath it. The question wasn't whether they should do it. The question was never whether they should. In America in 1859, when you find wealth in the ground, you take it. That's the contract. That's the dream. The question was only how fast they could pull it out before someone else did. By 1863, Virginia City is no longer a camp. It's a city, and it's growing faster than any city has a right to grow in a place with no water, no timber, and no arable land. The population explodes from a few hundred to over 15,000 in less than 4 years. By 1875, at the height of the Big Bonanza, the massive strike of the Virginia and California mines, the population reaches 25,000, possibly 30,000 if you count the miners working the surrounding hills and living in satellite camps. But population numbers don't tell you what it means to build a city on the side of a mountain in the Nevada desert. They don't tell you about the logistics, the violence, the sheer improbability of it. Everything has to be imported. Lumber comes from the forests of the Sierra Nevada, cut and hauled over the mountains by teamsters driving wagons up narrow, winding roads that kill men and animals regularly. Water is piped in from the mountains or hauled in barrels. Food comes from California. Fruits, vegetables, meat, flour, everything. The cost of living is astronomical. A simple meal costs what a week's groceries would cost in San Francisco. Eggs sell for $1 apiece during shortages. Whiskey, paradoxically, is cheaper than milk. The city builds itself in defiance of every natural law. It rises in tiers up the mountainside. C Street is the main commercial artery, lined with hotels, saloons, banks, and brothels. Above it, B Street, where the wealthy build their mansions. Below it, D Street and the gulches, where the working miners live in boarding houses and shanties. Everything is built of wood and brick, hauled up the mountain at enormous expense. And beneath it all, the mines. By the 1870s, the Comstock mines are the deepest in the world. The consolidated Virginia mine reaches 1,500 feet below the surface. The Ophir reaches 2,000. At these depths, the earth is hot, not warm, hot. Temperatures at the working faces reach 120, 130, sometimes 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is thin, choked with rock dust and explosive fumes. Water seeps through the walls. Not cool mountain water, but scalding underground springs that have to be pumped out constantly. The men who work these mines are not adventurers. They're not prospectors dreaming of their own strike. They're wage laborers, mostly immigrants. Irish, Cornish, Chinese, German, Italian. They work 10-hour shifts in conditions that would be illegal a century later. They descend in cages, iron boxes that drop them hundreds of feet per minute into darkness. They work by candlelight, swinging picks in heat that makes breathing difficult. They drill holes for explosives using handheld steel drills, breathing rock dust that will scar their lungs. They load ore into carts, haul timber for shoring, set charges, and hope the mountain doesn't collapse on them. The accident rate is staggering. Men die in cave-ins. They die in fires, in floods, in falls down shafts. They die from heat stroke, from silicosis, from explosions when dynamite detonates prematurely. The newspapers print the death notices in small paragraphs on the inside pages, if they print them at all. If you die alone, deep in the mine, and you're Irish or Chinese, you might not make the paper. You might just disappear. And yet the city flourishes, because above ground, wealth is flowing. The silver is so rich that even after the enormous costs of extraction, milling, and transport, the mines are printing money. The stock market in San Francisco exists largely to trade Comstock mining stocks. Fortunes are made and lost in hours. Speculators gamble on which mine will strike the next bonanza, which will run dry. The newspapers publish daily reports on ore quality, stock prices, dividend payments. On C Street, you can see the wealth made manifest. The International Hotel, opened in 1863, is 5 stories tall, the finest hotel between Chicago and San Francisco. It has running water, gas lighting, a dining room that seats 200. Wealthy mine owners and visiting dignitaries stay there. Ulysses S. Grant stays there. So does Mark Twain, though probably not in the expensive rooms. Piper's Opera House, built in 1863 and rebuilt after fires in 1883, brings culture to the mountain. Real opera, Shakespeare, concerts, lectures. Edwin Booth, the greatest actor of his generation, and brother to Lincoln's assassin, performs there. So does Lily Langtry, the celebrated actress and mistress of European royalty. Virginia City, in its prime, is not a frontier outpost. It's a cosmopolitan center with pretensions to rival any city in America. But walk down the slope to D Street, and you see the other city. The boarding houses where miners sleep in shifts. One man works while another sleeps in the same bed, hot bunking around the clock. The Chinatown district, crammed into a few blocks, where Chinese laborers live in conditions even worse than the white miners, working the same jobs for lower wages, excluded from the skilled positions and the unions. The red light district on D Street, where prostitutes service the miners, some women there by choice, making more money than they could anywhere else, others there by coercion or desperation. This is the machine that produces wealth. Not just the ore beneath the mountain, but the human system that extracts it. Capital flows down from San Francisco. Labor flows in from around the world. Silver flows out, refined into bars and shipped to the U.S., mint in Carson City, turned into silver dollars that will circulate across America and the world. By 1865, Virginia City has a fire department, a school system, 6 churches, and over 100 saloons. It has gas street lighting before many eastern cities. It has a functioning water system, though water remains expensive. It has dozens of fraternal organizations, Masons, Odd Fellows, the ancient order of Hibernians for the Irish miners. It has unions. The Miners' Union is powerful, one of the first successful labor organizations in American mining, negotiating for safety standards and a minimum wage of $4 per day for underground work. The city feels permanent. It feels like it will last forever. The mine owners build Victorian mansions on B Street with the confidence of men who believe the silver will never run out. The banks extend credit based on the assumption that the Comstock will produce for decades, maybe centuries. But silver is not wheat. You can't plant it next year, it's finite. And every ton that comes out of the mountain is a ton that's gone forever. By 1875, the big bonanza is in full swing. The Virginia and California mines hit the richest ore body in the history of the lode. Solid masses of silver so pure you can see the metal gleaming in the rock. The stock value of these 2 mines reaches a combined $160 million. Ordinary workers who bought a few shares become wealthy. The mine owners, Mackay, Fair, Flood, and O'Brien, known as the Bonanza Kings, become some of the richest men in the world. It's the peak, the absolute zenith. Virginia City is producing more wealth per capita than any city in America. It's famous internationally. It's the story of the American West, the story of what happens when you combine technology, capital, and human ambition in the pursuit of mineral wealth. But the mountain is not infinite. And they're starting to notice that the ore is getting leaner. At the height of its wealth, Virginia City doesn't just build, it performs. It performs respectability, culture, sophistication. It performs the belief that a city built on silver extraction in the middle of the desert is not temporary. It's not a boomtown, it's the future. Every Sunday the churches fill. The Episcopal Church of St. Mary in the mountains, Catholic and serving the large Irish population, holds Mass in a building that cost $40,000 to construct in 1876, almost $1 million today. The pews are carved wood. The windows are stained glass, shipped from Europe. The altar is marble. This is not a frontier chapel. This is a cathedral, scaled for a smaller city perhaps, but designed with the aesthetic language of permanence. The Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, all of them build substantial structures. They hold socials, charity drives, temperance meetings. The women's auxiliary societies organize picnics, fundraisers, cultural events. They're creating civil society in a place where, 15 years earlier, there was nothing but sage and stone. The schools teach Latin. The public library, founded in 1861, has thousands of volumes, not just popular fiction but philosophy, history, science. The territorial enterprise employs real journalists, including a young Samuel Clemens, who will become Mark Twain. He writes about the mines, the stock speculation, the absurdity of frontier capitalism, honing the satirical voice that will make him famous. The wealthy build homes that would be impressive in San Francisco or New York. John Mackay's mansion on B Street has imported furniture, crystal chandeliers, a wine cellar. His wife, Marie-Louise, hosts salons, invites visiting dignitaries, cultivates the social connections that will eventually move the family to Europe, where they'll buy a castle and their daughter will marry an Italian prince. The wealth extracted from beneath Virginia City, from the labor of Irish and Cornish miners working in 130-degree heat, will eventually purchase European aristocracy. But the social calendar doesn't stop there. There are theater productions, concerts, lectures, political rallies. Nevada becomes a state in 1864, rushed into the Union by Lincoln to help ratify the 13th Amendment and secure Nevada's silver for the war effort. Virginia City becomes the de facto power center of the new state, even though the capital is in Carson City, 15 miles away. The wealth flowing from the Comstock gives Virginia City political influence disproportionate to its population. The men of Virginia City perform a particular kind of Western masculinity. They drink heavily, they gamble recklessly, they fight, sometimes with fists, sometimes with guns. The saloons along C Street never close. The Delta Saloon, the Washoe Club, the Crystal Bar, these are social institutions as important as the churches. Men negotiate business deals over whiskey. They trade mining stocks. They argue politics. They establish credit, reputation, standing. And they spend. God, do they spend. When a miner strikes it rich on a lucky stock speculation, he doesn't save. He buys drinks for the house. He buys a new suit, a watch, a ring. He sends money home to Ireland or Cornwall or Germany. He gambles it away at faro or poker. The velocity of money in Virginia City is staggering. It flows in from the mines and out through the saloons, the brothels, the merchants, the teamsters. It circulates rapidly, enriching everyone who touches it, before flowing down to San Francisco and out into the world. The women of Virginia City, at least the respectable ones, perform domesticity in the face of impossibility. They maintain households without running water. They raise children in a city where typhoid and diphtheria are common, where the air is full of smoke from the mills and dust from the mines. They create gardens in soil that has to be imported. They host dinners, organize charity events, teach Sunday school, maintain the social fabric that makes a city something more than a labor camp. The prostitutes of D Street perform something else. They service the thousands of single men working the mines. Men far from home, often far from any women they could court respectably. The women in the brothels are Irish, French, Chinese, Mexican, American-born. Some are there by choice, entrepreneurial sex workers making far more money than they could as domestic servants or seamstresses. Others are there by desperation, by coercion, by circumstances that left them no other options. The newspaper ads are euphemistic, boarding houses for gentlemen, but everyone knows what they are. The city has its scandals, its violence, its dark undercurrents. There are murders over card games, over women, over mining claims. There are robberies, there's corruption, mine superintendents who high-grade ore, skimming the richest samples for themselves. There are stock manipulation schemes, insider trading, fraud. The line between legitimate speculation and criminal fraud is thin and constantly negotiated. But the overwhelming sensation in Virginia City between 1865 and 1878 is confidence. The confidence that the silver will keep coming, that the mines will keep producing, that the city will keep growing, that this is not a temporary phenomenon but a permanent shift in American geography, that Virginia City will become the San Francisco of Nevada, the Denver of the Great Basin, a major metropolitan center for the next century. That confidence is the foundation of everything they build. It justifies the investment in infrastructure, in culture, in civic institutions. It justifies the importation of marble and mahogany and stained glass to a mountainside in the desert. It justifies the belief that you can build a city anywhere if you have enough wealth flowing through it. But confidence is not the same as wisdom, and the Comstock Lode, beneath all the performance and all the ritual, is getting harder to mine. The first sign comes in the late 1870s, and it's not dramatic. It's just a shift in the numbers. The ore grades are declining. The bonanzas are smaller, harder to find. The cost of extraction is rising as the mines go deeper, as the heat increases, as more pumping is required to keep the water out. In 1878, the Virginia and California mines announce lower dividends. The stock prices drop. It's not a crash, not yet, but it's a tremor, a warning. Investors in San Francisco start to get nervous. Maybe they overextended. Maybe they leveraged too much on the assumption of continuous bonanzas. The mine owners respond the way capital always responds. They cut costs. Wages stay flat while the cost of living remains high. Safety measures are relaxed. The pressure on the miners increases. More ore per shift, faster work, less time for maintenance and shoring. The union pushes back, but the power dynamic is shifting. When the mines were making money hand over fist, the owners could afford concessions. Now, with margins tightening, they're less generous. And then the accidents increase. Not because the miners are less careful, but because the margins for error have shrunk. In 1879, a fire breaks out in the Yellow Jacket mine. It spreads through the timber shoring, fed by the hot, dry air. Miners trapped below die of smoke inhalation. The official count is 21 dead. Unofficially, it's higher. Some Chinese workers aren't counted, some bodies are never recovered. The city mourns, but the mines reopen within days. Production can't stop. The deeper they go, the more expensive it becomes. At 2,000 feet, the heat is unbearable. The engineers design ventilation systems, ice rooms where miners can cool off between shifts. But it's never enough. The water pumps run constantly, powered by steam engines that consume enormous amounts of wood and coal. The cost of hauling fuel up the mountain is staggering, and the ore is leaner. Where they once pulled out rock that was 30% silver, now they're working seams at 5%, 3%. It's still valuable, but the economics are different. The profit margins shrink. The mills have to process more rock to produce the same amount of silver. By 1880, the peak is clearly over. Production is down. Stock prices are down. The population starts to decline. Slowly at first, then faster. Miners leave for new strikes in Colorado, Montana, Arizona. Merchants close up shop. The boarding houses empty out. Families pack up and move to San Francisco, to Sacramento, to anywhere with more reliable work. The city tries to adapt. There are new strikes announced. Investors claim they've found another bonanza just a little deeper, just in the next shaft over. Stock prices spike briefly on the news, then fall again when the ore doesn't materialize. It's a pattern of hope and disappointment that repeats every few months. The newspapers try to stay optimistic, printing stories about technological innovations that will make deeper mining profitable, about new machinery that will reduce costs. But technology can't create silver where there isn't any. The richest parts of the lode are gone. What remains is too deep, too hot, too expensive to extract profitably. In 1881, a major fire sweeps through the city itself. It starts in a lodging house and spreads rapidly. Everything is wood. Everything is tinder dry. A whole section of C Street burns. The fire department, undermanned and underfunded now, can't stop it. When the flames are finally contained, dozens of buildings are gone. Some are rebuilt. Many are not. The insurance companies, spooked by the decline in property values, raise their rates or pull out entirely. The banks start to fail. Not all at once, but one by one. They've extended too much credit based on the assumption of future silver production. When the mines can't pay, the loans default. Depositors panic and withdraw their money. Some banks close their doors overnight, leaving working people's savings locked inside forever. The mine owners, the Bonanza Kings and their rivals, see the writing on the wall. John Mackay diversifies, investing in banking and telegraph companies. His partner James Fair gets into real estate in San Francisco. They're not abandoning Virginia City out of malice, just pragmatism. The silver made them rich, but they're not going to ride the decline into bankruptcy. They're capitalists, not martyrs. By 1883, the population is below 10,000. By 1885, it's under 5,000. The exodus accelerates. Whole blocks stand empty. The Chinese population leaves almost entirely. Without work, there's no reason to stay in a place where they were barely tolerated when times were good. The prostitutes move to other boomtowns, other mining camps. The saloons close one after another. Piper's Opera House still hosts occasional performances, but the audiences are smaller. The visiting stars are lesser known. Eventually, the shows stop coming. It's too far, too expensive, for too small an audience. The churches struggle to keep their doors open. The ministers and priests move on to larger congregations. The schools consolidate. The library's budget is cut, then cut again. And the mines keep going, but barely. They're operating at a loss now, kept open only by the hope that they'll strike one more bonanza. The pumps run constantly to keep the lower levels from flooding. The cost of pumping exceeds the value of the ore being extracted, but stopping the pumps means losing the mine forever. Once it floods, it's done. In 1886, the consolidated Virginia mine suspends operations. The California mine follows shortly after. One by one, the great mines of the Comstock close. Some are stripped for equipment. Some are just abandoned, the shafts left open, the machinery left to rust. The workers who remain are the desperate, the stubborn, the ones who have nowhere else to go. They work small claims, reworking the tailings, scavenging what little silver remains in the massive waste piles left by the big operations. It's subsistence mining, barely profitable, but it's something. By 1890, Virginia City's population is around 3,000, and still falling. The city that once rivaled San Francisco is now smaller than a typical farming town. The mansions on B Street stand empty, their windows broken, their interiors stripped by scavengers. The schools are nearly empty. The post office operates limited hours. The railroad still runs, but less frequently. There's not enough freight to justify daily service. The city hasn't died yet, but it's dying. The question is no longer whether it will survive, but how long it will take to disappear completely. By 1900, Virginia City is a ghost town that still has people living in it. The population hovers around 1,000, mostly older men who never left, a few families hanging on to property they can't sell, and a small number of Chinese merchants who serve the remaining population. The grand buildings of C Street look more like stage sets now, false fronts hiding empty rooms. The mines are closed. Not temporarily suspended, but finished. The equipment has been salvaged, the pumps silenced. Underground, the lower levels are flooding with groundwater, slowly filling with water that will never be pumped out. The intricate network of tunnels, the thousands of miles of passages carved beneath the mountain, are becoming underground lakes. The timber shoring is rotting, the shafts are collapsing. In a few decades, much of the Comstock will be inaccessible forever, sealed by water and collapsed rock. On the surface, the massive stamp mills that once thundered day and night sit silent and rusting. Some have been dismantled and moved to newer mining districts. Others just stand there, monuments to industrial ambition, slowly being reclaimed by desert weather. The sound of Virginia City now is wind, just wind, and occasionally the creak of old wood settling, the crash of a roof finally giving way. A few attempts are made to revive the mines in the early 1900s. New investors buy up claims promising that modern technology will make the remaining ore profitable. Electric pumps, they say, will be cheaper than steam. New milling techniques will extract silver from low-grade ore that was previously discarded. A few small operations start up, employ a few dozen men, and then close when the economics don't work. The silver is still there, technically, but there's not enough of it left to justify the cost. The city itself enters a strange liminal state. It's not quite dead, but it's not alive. The remaining population maintains the essential services: a small post office, a school with 20 students, a few stores selling basic supplies. The International Hotel stays open, but most rooms are empty. Travelers occasionally pass through on their way to Reno or Carson City, look around at the ruins, and move on. During the Depression years of the 1930s, a few people moved back to Virginia City, not to mine, there's nothing to mine, but because housing is cheap. You can buy a whole building for a few $100s, or just squat in one of the abandoned structures. Some people run small tourist operations, giving tours of the old mines, selling relics. It's not prosperity, but it's survival. The federal government, through various Depression-era programs, stabilizes some of the historic buildings. The WPA employs local workers to shore up Piper's Opera House, to repair some of the churches, to preserve what's left of the Victorian downtown. It's heritage preservation, which is a polite way of saying, this place is history now, not a living city. World War II brings a brief flicker of activity. The government needs metals, and they're willing to subsidize operations that wouldn't otherwise be profitable. A few mines reopen, extract what they can, and close again when the subsidies end. The workers who come for the war work leave when it's over. By the 1950s, Virginia City has found a new economic model: nostalgia. The Old West is becoming marketable. Television shows about cowboys and gunslingers are popular. Americans are fascinated by the frontier era, now safely in the past, sanitized and romanticized. Virginia City starts marketing itself as a living museum, an authentic Western town where you can experience the Old West. The remaining storefronts become tourist shops. They sell cowboy hats, toy six-shooters, postcards of the old days. Some of the saloons reopen, not for miners but for tourists who want to drink in a real Old West saloon. The Historical Society gives tours of the old mansions, the mines, the cemeteries. They tell stories about the Bonanza Kings, about Mark Twain, about the glory days when this was the richest city in America. It's strange, this performance of the past. The buildings are real, the history is real, but it's being repackaged, sold back to Americans as entertainment. The work of mining, the heat, the danger, the death, becomes a colorful story told to children. The massive wealth extraction becomes a tale of adventure and daring. The inequality, the exploitation, the environmental destruction, these get edited out, or mentioned briefly, and then glossed over. What remains is the mythology: rugged individualism, frontier justice, boom and bust. The strategy works, economically. By the 1960s and 70s, tourism is keeping Virginia City alive. Not prosperous, but alive. The population stabilizes around a few hundred year-round residents who serve the thousands of tourists who visit each year, mostly in summer. The storefronts stay occupied. The buildings get maintained after a fashion. It's an economy built on the past, on showing people what used to be here, rather than creating anything new. In 1961, Virginia City is designated a National Historic Landmark. The entire town is recognized as historically significant. This brings more tourism, more attention, and more regulation. You can't just tear down buildings anymore. You can't significantly alter the historic character of the downtown. The city is frozen in amber, preserved as it was, or as people imagine it was, in the 1870s. But preservation is complicated. It's not neutral. Every decision about what to preserve and how to present it is a political and economic choice. The Bonanza Kings get museums and historical markers. The miners get a few paragraphs in the tour guide. The Chinese population, at one point over 2,000 people, gets a small exhibit, if that. The prostitutes get mentioned, usually with a wink and a joke. The environmental damage gets ignored almost entirely. By the 2000s, Virginia City is a fully realized tourist town. The summer population swells to several thousand. The winter population drops back to a few hundred hardy souls who maintain the infrastructure and wait for the next season. The economy is entirely dependent on visitors willing to drive an hour from Reno to experience the Old West. But the Old West they're experiencing is a reconstruction, a performance. The gunfight reenactments in the street are theater. The saloon poker games are tourist traps. The ghost tours at night are entertainment, not history. What's real is the buildings, the mountain, the mines beneath their feet. The rest is narrative, carefully curated to be exciting but not too challenging, nostalgic but not too sad. Today, Virginia City exists in several states simultaneously. It's a ghost town. It's a tourist attraction. It's a real town with a few hundred year-round residents. It's a national historic landmark. It's a case study in boom and bust capitalism. It's a symbol of American expansion. It's a site of environmental disaster. It's all of these things at once, and the tension between them defines its present. The mines themselves are mostly closed to the public. Too dangerous. The shafts are flooded, the tunnels unstable, but some have been partially reopened for tours. You can descend a few hundred feet into the Chaleur mine, see the timber shoring, the narrow passages. Imagine what it was like to work down there in the dark and heat. It's sanitized, of course. You're not there for 10 hours. You're not breathing rock dust. You're not at risk of cave-in. But it gives you a sense of scale, of the sheer ambition required to carve a city out of a mountain. The environmental legacy is complicated. The Comstock produced hundreds of thousands of tons of mine waste, tailings laced with mercury and other heavy metals used in the milling process. These tailings are still there, massive piles of toxic waste slowly leaching into the groundwater. The EPA has been involved in cleanup efforts since the 1990s, trying to stabilize the worst sites, prevent further contamination. It's slow work, expensive, and it will never fully undo the damage. The forests that once covered the nearby mountains are long gone. The entire eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada was clear-cut to provide timber for the mines. What grew back is different. A patchwork of scrub and second growth, nothing like the original old-growth forest. The ecology of the region was permanently altered by 2 decades of intensive industrial extraction. The water situation is better now, ironically, because the population is so small. But the aquifer was damaged by mining, contaminated by seepage from the mines, depleted by the constant pumping. The long-term effects are still being studied. Some streams that once ran year-round now run dry in summer. Politically, Virginia City is part of Story County, Nevada, one of the least populous counties in the state. The county government operates out of a historic building in Virginia City, managing a budget that's mostly dependent on property taxes and tourism revenue. It's a strange form of governance, overseeing a population that fluctuates wildly by season, maintaining historic buildings that cost far more to preserve than modern structures would. There are ongoing disputes about development. Some residents and business owners want to 13 expand tourism infrastructure, more hotels, more restaurants, more attractions. Others want to preserve the historic character, keep it authentic, resist commercialization. It's the eternal tension of heritage tourism. How do you monetize the past without destroying what makes it valuable? The historic preservation laws are strict, which means renovation is expensive. Want to repair a building on C Street? You need to use period-appropriate materials and methods. Want to open a new business? It has to fit the historical aesthetic. These restrictions are well-intentioned. They prevent someone from putting up a neon-lit chain restaurant in the middle of the Victorian downtown, but they also make economic activity difficult. You're trying to run a 21st century business with 19th century infrastructure. The year-round residents are an interesting mix. Some are history buffs who bought property because they love the Old West. Some are retirees living on fixed incomes in cheap housing. Some are entrepreneurs running tourist businesses. Some are just people who were born there and never left, maintaining the same connection to place that kept people in Appalachian coal towns after the coal ran out. And there's a small but persistent group of people who still believe there's silver down there. Not major deposits, not another bonanza, but enough to make small-scale mining profitable. Occasionally someone gets a permit, drills some test holes, finds traces of silver, and starts talking about reopening operations. It never goes anywhere. The economics don't work, but the dream persists. The foundational American dream that wealth is in the ground, waiting to be claimed by whoever is willing to dig for it. The historical sites attract a steady stream of visitors. The Fourth Ward School opened in 1876 and now a museum, shows you what education looked like in a frontier boomtown. The cemeteries, multiple cemeteries divided by religion and ethnicity, show you how death worked. The Catholic cemetery for the Irish, the Masonic cemetery for the Protestant fraternal elite, the Chinese cemetery, and the prostitutes section where women were buried with markers like found dead instead of names. Mark Twain is everywhere in the marketing. He lived here for 2 years, worked at the Territorial Enterprise, wrote some stories. It was a formative experience for him, but he left and became famous elsewhere. Still, Virginia City claims him. His name is on museums, tours, and merchandise. It's ironic in a way because Twain's writing about Virginia City was often satirical, critical of the speculation and fraud. But that complexity gets smoothed over. He's just the famous writer who was here once. And that's valuable. The Territorial Enterprise still exists, kind of. It's published weekly, covering local news and tourism events. It's not the powerhouse newspaper it once was, when it had national influence and employed serious journalists. But it maintains the name, the legacy, the connection to a time when Virginia City mattered to America. During the pandemic of 2020-2021, tourism collapsed. The shops closed. The tours stopped. Virginia City was empty in a way it hadn't been since the early 1900s. The year-round residents hunkered down, wondered if the town would survive without tourism revenue. Eventually, visitors came back, people looking for outdoor activities, open spaces, distance from cities. The town survived, but it was a reminder of how fragile the economy is, how dependent on people willing to drive up the mountain to look at history. Virginia City is not an anomaly. It's a pattern. Across the American West, you can find versions of this story. Body, California. Tombstone, Arizona. Leadville, Colorado. Cripple Creek, Colorado. Jerome, Arizona. Towns that exploded into existence when valuable minerals were found, grew rapidly based on extraction, and collapsed when the minerals ran out or prices fell. Some are completely abandoned. Some, like Virginia City, survive as tourist attractions, but they all follow the same arc: discovery, exploitation, wealth, collapse, memory. What makes Virginia City significant is not that it's unique, but that it's representative. It shows you, in compressed form, how American capitalism works, how wealth is created not by producing things, but by extracting things, how labor is drawn from wherever it's cheapest, immigrants, the desperate, the landless, and used until it's no longer needed, how boom towns are built on the assumption of permanence, even when everyone should know the resources are finite, how after the collapse the story gets repackaged and sold back as nostalgia. The men who got rich from the Comstock, Mackay, Fair, Flood, O'Brien, Hearst didn't stay in Virginia City. They took their wealth to San Francisco, New York, Europe. They built mansions, bought art, married into society. Their children became the American aristocracy. George Hearst's son, William Randolph Hearst, used his father's mining fortune to build a newspaper empire and eventually a castle at San Simeon. The silver pulled from beneath Virginia City by Irish miners working in lethal heat became a castle on the California coast. That's how extraction works. The wealth flows up and out, away from the source. The environmental damage was never factored into the economics. The clear-cut forests, the mercury-contaminated tailings, the depleted aquifer, these were externalities, costs borne by everyone and no one. The mine owners didn't pay to restore the forests. They didn't pay to clean up the toxic waste. They extracted the value and left the damage. A century later, taxpayers are funding the cleanup. The cultural legacy is complicated. Virginia City contributed to the mythology of the American West. The idea that the frontier was a place of opportunity, where ordinary men could strike it rich, where democracy and capitalism thrived in the wilderness. That mythology is not entirely false, but it's incomplete. Some men did get rich. Most didn't. Most worked hard, breathed rock dust, drank too much, and died young. Their stories don't get museums. The racial dynamics of the Comstock are visible in the historical record if you look. The Chinese were essential to the operation. They worked in the mines, built the railroads, ran laundries and restaurants, but they were paid less, housed worse, and excluded from the unions and social institutions that gave white workers power. When the silver ran out and people left, the Chinese population disappeared almost entirely. Their cemetery is there, but many of the headstones are unreadable or gone. Their history is harder to access, less preserved, less marketable. The women of Virginia City are remembered in particular ways. The respectable women, wives, mothers, teachers, church ladies, are acknowledged but rarely centered. The prostitutes are mentioned more often, because they fit the Wild West narrative, but they're caricatured. The real economic and social dynamics that drove women into sex work, poverty, limited options, male violence, get simplified into soiled doves and ladies of the night. It's easier to romanticize than to understand. Virginia City also reveals something about American attitudes toward labor. The miners who made the wealth possible are acknowledged in the museums and tours, but they're not celebrated the way the mine owners are. There are no statues of anonymous Irish laborers. There's no miners' museum with the same prominence as the mansions on B Street. The message is clear. The people who had capital, who organized the extraction, who controlled the wealth, they're the heroes. The people who actually dug the silver out of the ground are just workers, interchangeable, forgettable, and yet those workers created the only durable legacy of the Comstock. The Miners' Union in Virginia City was one of the first successful labor organizations in American mining. It established minimum wages, safety standards, and the principle that workers had a right to negotiate collectively. That legacy spread across the West, influencing mining communities from Montana to New Mexico. The mine owners fought it, but they couldn't break it. That organizational power, that solidarity, survived long after the silver ran out. Virginia City also asks questions about sustainability that America has never fully answered. Is it acceptable to build a city, an economy, a community on a resource you know will run out? Is it responsible to clear-cut forests, contaminate water, and create toxic waste in pursuit of short-term profit? How do you balance immediate economic benefit against long-term environmental cost? These are not theoretical questions. They're the same questions we ask today about fossil fuels, about rare earth mining, about any extractive industry. The tourist economy that sustains Virginia City now is its own form of extraction. It extracts value from history, from memory, from the landscape. It's less destructive than mining. Nobody's drilling 1,000-foot shafts anymore, but it's still commodifying what's left. The real Virginia City, the lived experience of the people who built it and worked in it, is inaccessible. What tourists see is a curated version, a safe version, a version that confirms the mythology rather than complicating it. But maybe that's inevitable. Maybe every dead thing becomes a symbol, a story, a lesson we tell ourselves. Virginia City is a symbol of American ambition. It's a symbol of American greed. It's a symbol of American ingenuity. It's a symbol of American waste. It's a symbol of American resilience. Which symbol you see depends on where you're standing, what you value, what you're willing to acknowledge. The truth is probably that Virginia City is all of those things. It's not one story. It's dozens of stories, hundreds of stories, overlapping and contradicting. The story of the Bonanza Kings getting rich and the story of miners dying in fires are both true. The story of technological innovation and the story of environmental destruction are both true. The story of opportunity and the story of exploitation are both true. America has never been good at holding contradictions. We prefer simple narratives: progress or decline, heroes or villains, success or failure. But Virginia City refuses simplicity. It's a ghost town that's alive. It's a dead economy that sustains itself through memory. It's a place that was, and a place that is, and a place that never really was in the way we remember it. Stand on C Street again, now, in the present. The wind is still moving through the broken windows, still rattling the iron, still carrying the smell of sage from the mountains. The buildings are still there, some of them. Piper's Opera House, restored and hosting occasional performances. The Fourth Ward School, a museum now. St. Mary's in the mountains, still holding services for the few dozen people who attend. The saloons, serving tourists who want to drink where miners drank, though the tourists will leave in a few hours and the miners never did. Beneath your feet, beneath the street, beneath the town, the old mines are still there. Flooded, collapsed, inaccessible, but there. Thousands of miles of passages carved by hand and dynamite. Timber shoring slowly rotting in the dark water. The bones of the mountain, hollowed out in the pursuit of silver. $300 million in silver came out of this mountain. In today's money, over $8 billion. That wealth built San Francisco, helped win the Civil War, created American fortunes that lasted generations. And what did it leave behind? A town of a few hundred people, sustained by tourists who come to see what happens after the wealth runs out. Contaminated tailings, clear-cut forests, a place that matters to history, but not to the present. Virginia City is a question more than an answer. It asks, what is the cost of wealth? What is the cost of progress? What do we owe to the places we use and abandon? What do we owe to the people whose labor creates fortunes they'll never share? How do we remember honestly without romanticizing or condemning too simply? It asks, what happens when the silver runs out? What happens when the oil runs out? What happens when the soil is exhausted, when the water is gone, when the resources we built our civilization on are no longer available? Virginia City doesn't answer those questions, but it makes them impossible to ignore. The ruins are still there. The mine shafts are still there. The history is still there if you're willing to look past the gift shops and ghost tours to see what actually happened. This place is not just a ruin. It's a mirror. It shows you what America does, how we build, how we extract, how we move on. It shows you the distance between the people who profit and the people who work. It shows you what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. And maybe that's the value of ghost towns. Not that they're romantic or nostalgic, but that they're honest. They don't let you pretend that prosperity is permanent, that growth is inevitable, that the boom will never end. They stand there empty and weathered and say, this is what comes after. This is what happens when the resource runs out and the money moves on. This is the truth beneath the American dream. The wind moves through Virginia City, through the empty windows, through the false fronts, through the mine shafts filling with water. It's been moving through this place for 150 years, since before the miners came, and it will keep moving through long after the last tourist leaves and the last building falls. Places like this are not just ruins. They're questions we keep asking and rarely answer honestly. What do we build? What do we destroy? What do we leave behind? Virginia City doesn't answer. It just stands there, halfway between what it was and what it will become, waiting for us to decide what the story means. If you'd like to see more stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to Forgotten America Stories, and tell me in the comments which forgotten city or abandoned empire I should explore next. Thank you for watching.